I'm joined now by Lord Norman Lamont, who served as Chancellor under the former Conservative Prime Minister John Major. Lord Lamont, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm not going to ask you what he's going to have in the budget. We're going to find that out in a few hours' time. But the predicament that Alistair Darling faces today is an interesting one, because he's got to please the markets, and yet we are 6 weeks away from a general election. We all think it's going to be almost impossible for him to resist some kind of sweetener to make good headlines, isn't it?
I don't think there will be very much by way of sweeteners. The Chancellor himself has said this will not have giveaways in it. I think, on the other hand, there will be one or two measures to help employment, help small businesses with finance. But this is a very difficult situation where he has to balance the needs of prudence with the demands of the election. And I think he can do very little for the latter, because any giveaway is going to be very badly received. My impression is actually that the markets are suspending judgment. They know that until the election is over, real action is not going to be taken. But he can't make matters worse. But it is a pretty difficult situation that he is in. The other odd thing about it is that the budget he delivers will never be implemented, because if there's a Conservative government, obviously it'll be a completely different budget. If there is a Labour government with Liberal support, which is one other outcome, it will also be very different. And even if there is a Labour government, I strongly suspect there will be an emergency budget after the election. So what will actually happen is that Parliament will be dissolved in a week or 2 weeks' time. They will pass the Collection of Taxes Act so that taxes can be collected, notwithstanding there's no finance bill, and then they'll come back and start it all over again.
Indeed. So, because this actually will never go into law, we really are talking about an interesting balancing act that the Chancellor is doing today. He does have more room to manoeuvre because of slightly higher than expected tax receipts. Do you expect him to make any move at all on the deficit?
I don't think there will be further measures to reduce the deficit. I don't agree that he has room to wiggle or manoeuvre. I mean, if the budget comes in at 168 billion instead of 176 billion, that is not money to spend. All that should go into the reduction of debt. The figures are appalling, even if they... and when people say they've come in higher than expected, they've come in higher, but still lower than last year.
From a very, very low base.
Yes, and lower than last year, just not as low as people were expecting. So there's no money to give away at all. And I think we are, you know, I'm not saying, I wouldn't wish to be too alarmist, I'm not saying we are facing a debt trap, but it's quite interesting that the Institute of Fiscal Studies has talked about the growth rate falling, interest rates rising, and actually being quite close to a problem where financing the deficit would be real.
Now, of course, whoever ends up in government after May will have to make cuts to public spending, and indeed Labour will have to do that even if they have an outright majority. Something like £31 billion is what they're talking about. We're not going to see any details about that today, are we?
Well, I'm not sure. There was a story in the Financial Times 2 days ago which indicated he was going to fill in some of the detail.
Would that be sensible, do you think?
Well, I think it would be very good for the markets, but I would be very surprised if he actually did that. And if he does do that, I would give him some credit. But I would be quite surprised about that. What the government have done so far is to indicate headlines for public spending for the first 4 years of the 8-year deficit reduction.
Headlines don't scare the electorate, though, in the same way that detail does, right?
I totally agree with you. I don't think it's a satisfactory situation, but I doubt if he will go further.
Now, you were in a very interesting position yourself, and quite a similar one, back in 1992, when it was an extremely close, the last extremely close election. You were Chancellor, and indeed your budget may well have won the election, because you reduced taxes and that swung the vote. What was your... When you look at what's happening now, do you think that Alistair Darling has got anything like the kind of power that you had to make such a difference today?
I don't think he's got the room for manoeuvre that I had in '92. I introduced a smallish tax cut, which was a reduced rate band at the bottom end of the income tax scale. And I was able to do that. I think it cost about £2 billion, well, all the measures together. Actually, what happened was that the deficit worsened, and I found myself having to put up taxes.
You had to go back a year later, didn't you?
The following year. So I thought I had this room for manoeuvre. It turned out I would have been better not to have used it, but I obviously did not know that at the time. But it's crystal clear that Alistair Darling doesn't have any room for manoeuvre, and any sort of giveaway, I think, would be extremely badly received.
It would be too transparent. Now, of course, David Cameron was your special economic advisor. You obviously worked with him very closely. As a man, as a leader, what do you think of him?
Well, I think his characteristics are, one, he's highly intelligent. That was very obvious to me when he worked for me. But I think he has one characteristic which has emerged since he became leader of the Conservative Party, and that is that he's very cool in a crisis. If you recall that period when Gordon Brown probably should have called an election when the polls narrowed and he didn't, David Cameron was extremely cool in that situation. He and George Osborne didn't lose their heads. They came forward with some tax proposals on inheritance tax and so on, turned the situation round, and indeed were saying to Brown, come on, let's have the election. I think that is a characteristic he's shown repeatedly as leader of the party, and it's one that augurs well for him as Prime Minister. The other thing I'd say about him is that I think he's a very pragmatic person, and I think that is the quality you need to be a good Prime Minister.
Well, let's see if he gets the chance. Lord Lamont, thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Thank you.